Constitutional rights include the right to freedom of speech. Not every place affords their citizens these rights, nor do they always uphold them. Governments need organizations and people to slap their hands when they try to fringe on these rights or try to jail people just because they spoke out against them. This is where PEN comes into play.
My name is Brendan de Carries. I'm the Executive Director of PEN Canada. We are one of 145 centres of PEN International, which is a freedom of expression group that was founded in 1921. We have a mission that breaks roughly into three parts. We celebrate literature and promote the power of words to affect imagination and encourage civil society. We defend freedom of expression, so we examine the cases of writers who are threatened for the work they produce. And we help writers who have been displaced from their countries of origin to resettle in other countries, not just in Canada, but throughout Europe and in the UK. In the world of freedom of expression, there are about 1,000 cases a year of writers who are under attack, and trying to get them out of prison or trying to get measures put by the state to protect them is always a struggle. So there's an economy of attention, and prizes are the quickest way to value a writer sufficiently for the government to protect him. So each of those prizes serves a different purpose. So Escribir Sin Miedo is an investigative journalism prize in Honduras. It's the only one of its kind. And if you win that, you get to come to Canada, receive training with Canadian journalists. Your story is published worldwide, effectively. And we also translate it into English. The Ken Filko Award was named after someone who was very active, a 40-year legal career, sat on the Human Rights Council of Manitoba, and we give that to a Canadian who's done something to advance freedom of expression. So the winners have included Frankie James, who ran a campaign about the Canadian oil being a huge environmental disaster, and the Government of Canada defunded it. It's also gone to Desmond Cole, a Black Lives Matter activist. It's gone to a Bangladeshi blogger. And this year it went to Justin Brake, who is a reporter that was covering the Muskrat Falls protests and has actually been treated and criminalized in the courts. So that's an important award. And the third one, the One Humanity Prize, that's our most international. Now that is where what I was explaining about the economy of attention is clearest, because we have given it out, I think, 9 times, and half of those people have now been released. So one of them, the Burmese poet Zarganar, he was imprisoned in 2008 after giving interviews to the foreign press in the wake of Cyclone Nargis. He was then given a 48-year prison sentence, which is death. And he was released shortly after we gave him that award. Another winner was an Afghan student called Syed Parwez Kambaksh. He was given a death sentence because he was accused of blasphemy after sharing material with his classmates at university. And we gave him that award, and his death sentence was commuted to 25 years, and then he was subsequently released altogether 2 or 3 years later. Raif Badawi, who's in the news right now, the Saudi blogger, also won it. Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese Nobel laureate who died of cancer in prison, he's one of the non-successes because we gave it to him. But Nasrin Sotoudeh, the Iranian lawyer who's just been re-imprisoned for her work defending the women who are not wearing the mandatory hijabs, is another one. Eskinder Nega, who's a Ethiopian journalist, he was in prison for 18 years and he was just released earlier this year. So collectively, like as with every other freedom of expression group, you have to take your successes where you can, but these awards were created to focus in on just a few of these writers in the hope that will tilt their fate. Our attitude generally is that the courts and the government should be very wary of adding intrusions to the work of a journalist, so that in the Finkel case and in several others, the idea that the police should have access to information that a journalist is using because it may it may provide evidence of criminal activity. It's a very slippery slope, because you don't know this until you have the information. And the freedom of the press is premised on the idea that the press operate in good faith. Now, the Supreme Court of Canada, uniquely I think in English-speaking jurisdictions around the world, has added a libel defense over the last few years in Canada. There were two cases here. There was Cusson versus Kwan and Grant versus Torstar, and they were amalgamated into a single case that went up to the Supreme Court of Canada. And the issue there was, what happens if a journalist libels somebody but does so in good faith? They've made their best attempt to establish the truth, and it turns out not to be true. Should they be penalized and criminalized in the courts? And the Supreme Court of Canada ruled no, it should not be. Now, that's a new libel shield. It's called public interest responsible journalism. And within several years of that passing, it had very practical consequences in Toronto, because it was under the libel shield that new ruling provided that a lot of the stories on Mayor Ford were written, because it was impossible to have absolute proof, but people were writing on the understanding that the courts would protect them because they had undertaken every possible means to establish the truth of the story. And another part of PEN's work that is the number of voices that you simply never hear. And in Canada, that is something that within your lifetime has had an impact. So if you look back in PEN's history 20, 30 years ago, when homosexuality was criminalized in Canada and magazines and books about it were treated as completely banned by customs, groups like PEN stood up and said, no, that is a right to freedom of expression. That then went on to create a climate which completely reversed that attitude. And I think that's a sort of classic example of the importance of free expression. You don't know what your society will tolerate or actually approve of 20 years down the line. And the only valve that allows that future to come in is freedom of expression. So you play with it at your peril. And that means that you must tolerate a lot of expression that you find tedious and possibly offensive. So long as it's not hateful and targeting a definable group for violence, the PEN attitude is it should be allowed, and it should provoke counter speech. It should never provoke censorship.